Now the next part is, I talked about with a couple of you earlier about purity in copper. Now when you walk around and you get people telling you about their wires, some of them are going to be industry-wide as a manufacturer. There's incredible amounts of pressure on me from consumers, not you maybe, but people just like you, that are saying, what kind of copper are you using? Are you using a really, really pure copper? And I say, no, I'm using a 99.99% pure copper. What it is it's a percentage of improvement of conductivity of the copper versus 100% in the exact same gauge size. But if you increase, and you go, and you add another 9, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 nines here. So let's say we managed to get a 7 nines pure conductor. That means that that conductor in the same gauge size here in 6 nines pure is going to be 1.00000001 more conductive. And I tell you what, that's not very audible. In fact, I cannot hear the difference between the 99.95% and the 99.99% that we currently use. We used to use electrolytic tough pitch. People kept on saying to us, why don't you get into the more pure conductors? And we went up 0.05%, which should have been a huge improvement. But when you go from a 16 gauge conductor up into a 10 gauge conductor, the difference audibly is so dramatic, it's unbelievable. You can try it at home. Go down to the hardware store, get yourself some good old 10 gauge solid core wire, and replace whatever it is you're using for speaker cables right now. I think you'll just be beside yourself. If you're thinking of buying a $30,000 set of speakers while you're here, forget the whole idea. Go down and get some of that big wire, get an electrician to come in. For 10 grand, you'll rewire your audio system, and you'll be so pleased you just won't be able to sleep at night. And then you'll want to phone me back and I'll sell you some cables. Now this here, basically, this illustration shows that if the percentage included all of the space, then imagine if you went from a 16 gauge into a 10 gauge conductor, how much less resistance you have. Okay? Because you lower your resistance, you're allowing more signal to come through. And one of the things that I found is the micro dynamics and micro detail really start to show up at that level, because they're not the ones that are represented with the greatest amount of signal. They've got very small representations of signal behind it. So imagine a diaphragm of the microphone picking up the string of the guitars. It picks up that hard leading edge, which is where the pick hits the strings, because there's lots of energy behind that, moving that diaphragm a lot. But it still continues to move a little bit, and will even pick up the bouquet of the wood of the instrument, correct? But those are represented by much lower electrical representations of energy. Okay? So in order to be able to get them back through, you want much, much, much lower resistance to get that through into your amplifier so it can even be amplified and played. You ever used a cup or a cone or a point or something like that underneath your audio system? Like over there on my rack, you can see that fancy rack that I made. Right on the corners here, you can see, well, you can't really see, but there's a bolt that goes into the side that actually clamps on an inner rod, or the inner part of the rod. It's net down. And what it does is it transfers the energy, the vibrational energy, out of all these components and speakers into the floor. So as I started to learn all this stuff, I started deciding, well, what if I was to take, you were having to work through all this plastic here, and the plastic on the conductors, and all of this circuit board which doesn't transfer vibration very well. What if I was to actually hit the conductor itself? Next ring. This here is the conductor. This represents a tube. In this conductor right here, if I was to fill that with a material for dampening, like sand, for example, would be a good one, although it's not a really good one, because the mass of a granule of sand is less than that of the copper conductor. Okay? So what would be better? Steel. Okay? And then I'll give you another secret. I packed it. The tighter you pack it, the more dampening you have. What I've done on these particular cables, on the Genesis that you see here, these little vibration clutches, the little brass things that I'm putting my light on down over there, those are actually brass circuits or parts that have made up of the machine shop. They got claws on the inside that come up and push on my cable without completely penetrating. They do push on the conductor very, very hard though, because if it crushes that conductor, audibly what you get is unbelievable. You start to reduce the amount of noise, and as you do this, and especially as you're using bigger and bigger conductors, you start to hear minute details that you never heard before. We have 17 people now. We do over $1 million a year in business. We started out of a little town in Barhead, Alberta, and I have no idea, scientifically what it was that's coming from.